Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 416 for February 17th, 2025. I've got a really fun interview today with Yael Grauer. I first talked with her some point late last year, maybe after interviewing Stacey Higginbotham. But I found out she was going to be at ShmooCon and got a chance to actually meet her in person, and we even had the opportunity to go to a party and just talk. It was so much fun. So I knew I was going to enjoy this interview with her, and I absolutely did. It was just a lot of fun. And this interview, I think, is a little different than some of my other interviews because it's just so kind of casual and relaxed. We really just kind of got into a groove and started having a lighthearted discussion. And, even talking about some pet peeves and more personal points of view. Y'all is just really easy to talk to. And after meeting her in person, it just kind of felt natural to ramble a little bit. So this interview might be a little less structured than some of the other ones I've done, but I think that's a good thing. Before we get into the interview, just a couple quick notes on jargon. We talk about a list serve. If you're not familiar with the term, it's really just kind of another name for a mailing list. It's kind of a particular way of doing it back in the old days. But when people talk about list serves today, they're pretty much talking about an email list. And we do briefly talk about MFA or multi-factor authentication. I think that basically covers the jargon. So anyway, Yael has been all over the place and done all sorts of things. But today we're going to talk about her work at Consumer Reports and the Security Planner tool, which I've talked about on the show before. It's been a while, but it's still there. It's still going strong, and they keep updating it. And one of the things I really like about it is it starts off by asking you about your situation. Because whenever you're doing threat modeling, whenever you're trying to figure out what it is you want to protect and who you want to protect it from, what are the consequences of failure, you really need to ask some basic questions. And this doesn't ask you a lot of questions, but it asks you what kind of devices you have and maybe a couple things about your situation. And then gives you a custom list of things that would make you more secure. It's very easy to use, and the advice is really, really good. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about threat modeling and talk about how they come up with the recommendations they make and a few other things related to modern security and privacy. So why don't we just get to the interview with Yael Grauer from Consumer Reports. Yael Grauer works at Consumer Reports as a program manager focusing on privacy and security. She comes from an investigative tech reporting background, writing for the likes of The Atlantic, Ars Technica, Slate, The Intercept, Popular Science, Wired, Vice, Wirecutter, and more. It's amazing. You've been everywhere. And so glad to finally have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you.
It was great meeting you, by the way. I got a chance. It was kind of a random thing that we happened, because we worked this out beforehand, but I got a chance to meet you at ShmooCon, which was fantastic. Got to see you talk there. So that was great. I've actually had a chance to meet you in person, which actually doesn't happen a lot, sadly, when the podcasting thing. I get to see people sometimes, but I don't get to actually meet them. So that was fantastic. I really appreciated that. But okay, so as I was getting ready for this interview, I was looking back through some of the stuff that you've done, and I'm like, holy crap. It's like you're the Forrest Gump of privacy. You've been all these things that I've recommended or done or seen, or you do the big ass data broker opt-out list. The Security Planner tool now. You worked with Stacey Higginbotham on the report that we covered for IoT stuff, or for the data deletion stuff, sorry. You worked with Micah Lee back in the days when Zoom was saying that they were encrypted and they really weren't. You worked with EFF on the street-level surveillance project, which I didn't realize. It's something I've talked about before. And the Wirecutter article, I think that was the one that blew me away the most, because I remember trying to find good reviews and finding out what was a good VPN to recommend to people is really tough, as you well know. But I was reading Wirecutter, which, they do good stuff. And I was reading holy crap, these guys are really doing a good job with this. You were the one who wrote that. And I was like, oh my God, that was her. So it's so cool that now that I've pieced all these things together, you were there all along. And so
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the Security Planner tool, but kind of more broadly, we're going to talk about, how you might methodically approach your personal cybersecurity, something we call threat modeling. Consumer Reports has been there for over 90 years. That used to be called Consumers Union, I guess, way back in the day. But I've been a subscriber for decades, and I always go to them when I'm looking for a new appliance or some sort. But it's really cool that CR is finally, baking in security and privacy into their recommendations, which I think is fantastic. So anyway, thanks for doing all that you do, and we're going to dig into some of that today. Asking a cybersecurity expert how to be more secure is sort of like asking a random doctor on the street, how can I be more healthy? And, any doctor could give you a stock answer like, eat more veggies, exercise. But to really give you a good answer, they have to ask you some questions first. And cybersecurity is no different. So what are some of the important questions that we need to answer when we're trying to improve someone's security and privacy?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think cybersecurity is so broad that you can spend hours or days or even weeks doing things that don't actually address what you're most concerned about or the risk you face. And I've looked stuff up online where it wasn't even tailored to my own device. So I think we should ask people what devices they use and what they're concerned about. And then make sure to prioritize what they're doing so that if they only have time to do one or two things, that it's like directly impacting the thing that they're most worried about. But I think the analogy you gave is a really good one because, there are things that everybody should do. Like a doctor will probably tell you to, not smoke or get exercise or eat your vegetables. And I think I could probably safely tell everybody use unique passwords, use MFA. So some of it is pretty generic and some of it is very, very individual.
Right. Because if someone's got stage 3 cancer, eating vegetables is nice and everything, but they've got bigger problems, right? There are certain, security is probably the same way. If you're a journalist, an activist, a dissident, or if you've been stalked or a victim of abuse, you've got maybe bigger fish to fry. And so the stock answers, wouldn't.
Yeah. That's actually a good analogy because I remember when I was first worried about my security, I looked up some guide online and it was giving me a lot of information that was not at all helpful to harassment. So it's like if you're worried about somebody showing up at your house, this is not the time to learn Linux,
Right. Okay. So CR has this fantastic tool called Security Planner, and it's been around for a little while, and I've recommended it ever since I've known about it. And I took it back in the day, and it has changed since then. It's gotten better. It's gotten cooler. It's gotten the UI's gotten really good. So if I'm someone who wants to use this tool, and what is it like? How does it work? Like I go to the webpage, what do I see? What kind of things do I need to give it? Is it a long drawn out process? And then what does it give me? What's the output?
Sure. Yeah. So the way the Security Planner works is you go to securityplanner.org. And it'll ask you a series of questions, kind of honing in on what we already talked about. It'll ask you, what devices do you use? What are you concerned about? Do any of these situations apply to you? And it's pretty quick. It takes maybe 15 seconds to fill that out. And what it'll do is it'll give you a digital security plan that's customized based on the answers that you gave. And it's looking at, like you mentioned, threat modeling. We don't use that term in Security Planner, but that's kind of what it's doing. It's looking at what are you trying to protect? Who are you trying to protect it from? How bad will the consequences be if you fail? And then you can determine how much time and money you spend on it and how to prioritize it. But it gives you an action plan. It's based on an algorithm that is directly responsive to how you fill out the survey. And it'll give you a list to fill out. Or actually, a list to complete. So it'll give you a list of items to do, and it'll start with what we think is the highest priority based on your threat model.
Is it dynamic in the sense of, I guess I'm curious, I played around with a little bit myself to see if I could figure this out, but it's things like, what kind of devices do you have? Do you have smart TVs? Do you have smartphones, which almost everybody does now? And then you get into some other questions, like you said, how are you a stalking victim? Are you an identity theft victim? Some of these are checkboxes you can say too, which will affect the output. So how dynamic is it? Is it kind of a matter of, as I'm checking these things off, that just adds things to my list? Are there is there conflicting things? Like if I check two things, is it possible for two things to be that actually will give me different advice if I check them both? I mean, I don't know how dynamic this thing is.
We assign a number based on what you check off. We'll assign a number to the possible pages that you could get. And then that number is what'll put it in the order that you get, if you get that page at all. So that's kind of how it works on the back end. But people can always look at every single page, and we're constantly kind of tweaking it and updating it. We're like, oh, maybe this should be ranked higher. It's kind of more of an art than a science. But, we don't want to give people, obviously, a lot of the pages that we have are similar for two kinds of phones, just the settings are different. So we don't want to give you, not everybody needs to scroll through. How do you do this on the type of phone you don't have? So we try to do it that way.
I've actually thought about writing some sort of front end for my book the same way, because I've got 200 tips in my book, and and a lot of them are broken down based on, is it Android or is it iOS? Is it Mac or is it PC? And so you got to kind of find the section that applies to you. But yeah, it'd be nice if I could it's hard to do that with a dead tree book, but if I had some sort of a web page, the tool that went with it, it would be just like this, right? I'd say, okay, well, tell me what you got, and then I'll just modify the tips accordingly, so it's great. It's very tailored.
Though there are some pages that it will list, like fitness devices, it'll list 5 devices, and maybe sometimes we even link to the advice on the page itself. because those are constantly changing with every new. This is kind of the ongoing thing, is that we constantly have to update Security Planner.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's easier to just link to, like, here's how to change this setting on here. And we're linking to the actual, like Fitbit privacy setting page or whatever.
Yeah, trust me. That's why there's 5 editions of my book, because the screenshots and all the steps change all the time.
Right.
Because these people will not leave their OSs alone, and they got to keep moving stuff around and changing names and
I feel
adding
like
more features.
Like for users, sometimes they'll just close the whole thing if it doesn't. They're like, this doesn't work on my phone, and they just get frustrated and don't even.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of what we try to really tailor this to end users who maybe don't have a technical background, because a lot of people will. There's a lot of outdated security guides and a lot of advice that isn't applicable to specific phones, and people will just be like, oh, just apply these concepts. People don't know how to apply the concepts necessarily to new versions. So
yeah, right.
We try to do the heavy lifting for people, because I feel like this is already more work than you should need to do. Like in my ideal world,
for sure,
have to like get a security plan. This would all be,
Yes, I agree 100%. Okay, so how do I decide what the real threats are for me? How do I factor in, for example, and I'm curious if you try to take this into account, it's not just that this can happen, it's how likely is it to happen to me specifically? And then what are the consequences for me if this happens? Like, should I wear a bulletproof vest everywhere? Well, probably not, because while the consequences of being shot are extremely high, the likelihood of any individual person being shot is normally pretty low. Now, for some people, they're obviously necessary, but that's a very, very small subset of the population, right? So it's more than just, do I have a smartphone? It's like, okay, how likely am I going to be going to protests maybe? Or how often am I going to be crossing borders into repressive regimes that might take my phone back behind the counter and do something to it? And then, okay, let's say they do. What's the possible output? I realize that you're shooting for the average Joe person, but does that factor into how you design the tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot too. It also matters how much of a pain is it to do the thing, because I would not want to wear a bulletproof vest every day because, but even though like I live in a neighborhood where it's probably unlikely that someone will break into my house, I'm still going to lock my door because it's pretty easy to do. Like, it's not a hardship.
Right.
So yeah, so these are things that I look at, like what you want to avoid is putting a lot of time and effort into something that is unlikely to happen and would be relatively inconsequential if it happened. But I think it's also hard to predict how likely something is to happen, because a lot of people will be like, I'm not important, people don't care about me, nobody's going to try to steal my password. But then you plug in your email address into Have I Been Pwned, and it's like, oh yeah, this happens in an automated way, and people will try to get every account for everybody. Like, they're not limiting it to people they think are important or special. So, right. But no, we do factor that in. Even in the actual tips themselves, there's things where we'll say like, do this, and there's things where we'll say, consider this, and then people can kind of make that decision for themselves. Because I think people are actually pretty good at, not always, but I think like people are pretty good at knowing, like, how worried am I about this? How much energy and time do I want to put into this?
Yeah. Well, if you can't tell, I like my analogies. When I teach a course on this, one of the analogies I bring up is like one of the first slides I put up in the class, and like this is a 10-week class, and I say, don't panic, like the classic Hitchhiker's Guide, don't panic slide, right? And it's like, I'm going to tell you all the bad things that could happen. We're going to talk about how they happen and how you can protect yourself. But just because we're talking, endlessly about the bad stuff, and my analogy is it's like sex ed in high school. Like, it's focused not on the good parts. Like, it's always focused on here's all the horrible things that could go wrong. STDs and getting pregnant when you don't need to be pregnant, and but just because those things could happen, and here's how to protect those things. Don't freak out. Don't be paranoid. Don't let this keep you up at night necessarily. Yeah,
it's funny because I used to do workshops on threat modeling, and we would use the bike lock analogy, where we'd have like a crappy bike with 500 locks. Be like, don't do this, but also don't leave your fancy bike unlocked.
Right.
So it's like, it's kind of intuitive.
To your point about effort level too, is in the real world, we've come to deal with the regular everyday inconveniences of security, right? We lock the house when we leave. We lock the front door when we leave. We didn't, honestly, in the old days, a lot of people didn't. Mm-hmm. We lock our cars. If you have a purse, you hide it in the trunk if you're going to leave it in the car instead of leaving it visible. These are all inconveniences, and these are kind of a pain in the butt to do. But in the digital world, we haven't quite got there yet. We haven't quite got the feel for doing these kind of simple, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but once you do them enough, it's second nature.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I got in a debate with someone once about whether it was okay to leave a laptop in the back of the car in Ann Arbor. And I was like, no, like, you don't want to leave a laptop visible in your car. Like, what the hell, And they were like, but we're in Ann Arbor. And I'm like, how hard is it to take this with you? like, how bad would it be if that got stolen? Like, what? So, yeah, right. I don't know. It is kind of an art more than a science, but yeah, I don't know.
You've already kind of alluded to this, but the privacy and security landscape changes all the time. And so how often are your recommendations in the tool like reviewed to make sure they're still accurate or still whatever? And then how often do you find yourself having to update that? And then maybe on the flip side, let's say I've run this report and I've kind of got my report and I kind of went through the things I wanted to address. What might trigger me to go back and say, maybe I need to rerun this report and see if there's anything new or see if something's changed? So from each angle, like how often should these things be updated?
But yeah, no, we do spend a lot of time reviewing and updating it. We have a contractor, Jeff Landale, who's amazing, and he actually did a full content audit, and we're planning another one. But we also regularly look at cybersecurity news and how recommendations have changed and are changing, and we make updates as quickly as we can, which it's not instantaneous because we do get everything translated in Spanish. And my whole thing has always been, I want people to have the same experience no matter what language they are reading it in. Sure. So I will wait until we get it in Spanish. So even though I could just change the English and wait to do the Spanish, I will wait to do them both at the same time. And then we also have a listserv called Friends of Security Planner, which is sort of an informal advisory council for Security Planner. Okay. Yeah, it's really cool. People will we hash out a lot of information there. And so we try to always keep it updated, but I don't know. It's possible we've missed things. I'm always like, everybody email me or bug me if there's something we missed. So that's kind of the thing that's cool about being really involved in the cybersecurity community is that nobody's afraid to email me to be like, hello, like this is an old version. But yeah, and then as far as running a report, I think if your areas of concern have changed or you get a new device, you don't have to run a new report. You can use the search bar and look for individual guidance or look at all the tips in there. But it's definitely something I run through whenever I get a new device to make sure I haven't forgotten anything, because a lot of this is not all laptops are encrypted by default. Like the hard drives are encrypted by default, and there's just annoying things you have to remember that nobody has all this memorized, sadly.
So you got this listserv. So that kind of leads me to another question I had is like, where do you guys go for advice? Like, obviously you've got a lot of in-house advice already. You know a lot of stuff, but I don't rely on my own background. There are people I lean on. I've got my own kind of listserv of what we call privacy peeps, some friends of mine that we discuss this stuff all the time who are quote unquote in the industry. So nice. Who do you lean on? What's some of your go-to sources for this? Oh,
we recruit. I'm constantly looking for smart people and trying to get them on the list. There's a form you have to fill out just to make sure people will abide by the code of conduct. But yeah, I'm always trying to get people on the list. But I'm on a lot of Slacks and Signal groups and Discords with different hackers. And I try to really pay attention to what people are saying because I'm not a technical expert myself. I'm more of a translator. I consider myself to be. So, but we read a lot of articles where people are freaking out about something, and we try to make sure they're legitimate before we make changes. So yeah, I'll go on the list. I'll poke around. I'll ask people I know. We try to cite them. Not everybody always wants to be cited, but if somebody's done an article or something that we're referencing, we'll try to include that. But yeah, it's a constant process. I don't know if you had this experience. It was really hard at first for me to even get people to talk to me, but I think over time, they're like, oh, we like this project and we like what you're doing, and they're more willing, or they'll see that you make changes based on things that they say and are more willing to kind of do that.
So you said hackers, you actually, some of the people that you lean on for advice in your Slack group or whatever your listserv are hacker folks that, and you're so right about some of these. I see so many articles, and this actually, I feel like this is my job a lot of times, is that things that hit the mainstream media that are light your hair on fire stories, no, it's not that big a deal. It's really, really, really hard to pull this off, or it has only in this really weird situation. Those for some reason get the bulk of the news stories. But it is good to have people to help check you with that, and you lean on some folks in the hacker community,
right? Oh yeah, no, definitely, they're great. I mean, it's not even just articles. It's sometimes people freaking out on social media about something, or
sure. Oh yeah.
Actually, somebody just called me the other day, and they were worried that Signal was compromised because of an article about a bug that was fixed in 2020. Oh, God, yes.
It's a honeypot.
I'm like, we're good.
See, I told you. Oh God. If I had a nickel for
And then
every
do you
one of
get
those
people
social
who are
media
like
tweets.
like very concerned that Facebook is listening to them 24/7?
Oh, that's the other big one too.
Yeah.
I just talked about this the other day, and now I'm seeing ads for it. I get that a lot
Yeah,
too.
exactly. I'm like, it's actually more insidious than what you think. But also, my battery would die if my record button was on 24/7. So.
Right. Okay. Here's another thing I struggle with all the time, and I'm sure you do too, is some of the recommendations that you have are not just things that you can do, but actually do recommend in a couple cases anyway. I've seen this because I ran my own report, specific products and services. And I know like EFF is really big about not doing that. Like they try to avoid, whenever they're speaking with the EFF voice, to call out and say, yes, this is good or this is bad. You guys did actually list a few specific services. So how do you determine which ones you are comfortable promoting? And beyond just the technical aspects, do you look at other things like, what's their business model? Like, how do they make money? Where are they headquartered? Who owns the company? Like, I know of particular VPNs, that's a really big deal because a lot of times the VPN review sites are owned by the same people who own the VPNs. And 4 of the 5 top VPN services on the planet are actually all owned by the same company. So there are other considerations beyond technical. How much do you factor that into your recommendations?
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting that you mentioned VPNs. I mean, I think one of the cool things about Consumer Reports is that I don't get any money. If we recommend, and a lot of these are free services, like we'll recommend an authenticator app. Like I don't get paid for that. CR doesn't, like we have a really strict conflict of interest policy. But yeah, we do specifically look at privacy and security. So I'm not looking so much at like VPN speed. But it's kind of inspired by the digital standard, which is a framework that evaluates consumer technologies and how well they respect people's interests in terms of privacy and security, but also ownership and governance, to your point. And because we recommend so few products, we can really dig into the specifics pretty rigorously when we're deciding what to recommend. But yeah, it's a good question. I think sometimes people get upset too if you recommend a product owned by a company that they don't like. So we try to give people options. Like you don't have to use Chrome. You can also use Firefox or Brave.
Oh, please, yes. So. Yeah. And the other thing, again, back to the earlier point, these things also change all the time. Like there's been, like I recommended LastPass for many, many years until the debacle. And everybody screws up at some point, right? But it's how you screw up and how you respond that caused me to say, I can't recommend these guys anymore. And I had to go back and change a bunch of stuff because I had that listed all over the place in my book and other places too. And I had to find a backup. So like you, when I'm making recommendations, I always at least have something second on hand. So if somebody goes to my first recommendation, they say, something about that I don't like. Let me look at the second one. So it sounds like you kind of address that in the same way.
But I think there's also like multiple issues because like we talked about leaning on hackers, which is great. And like, I absolutely love that community. I consider myself a part of that community, but sometimes they recommend things that, your average Joe wouldn't be able to use or wouldn't want to use. Like they would not, I call it pain tolerance when you deal with something being kind of buggy or hard to use, but you're getting benefits from it. Like some people don't want the benefits enough to use, I don't know, a security key that doesn't really work very well or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, it is kind of a trade-off. We have a lot of discussions about it. So I don't think there's like a cut and dried answer because it's really situational. But yeah, I like the idea of we're like, here's 3 options. And then even telling people like, there's a trade-off here and here's what you can do to mitigate it if you choose this option, or you can use this option. But sometimes people are not going to switch necessarily. So.
Yeah. And I definitely, I don't think you're like me in that you try to go for the, my avatar is always my mother, right? If she can't do this, then I can't really recommend it because she's going to be in the same boat as a lot of people that are in my audience. Cause I try to go for the, the 99%, the regular everyday people who are not hackers or software engineers or.
Though there are mothers that are hackers and software engineers.
Oh, there are. Oh, of course. Really my mother's not mothers. One of them.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so I try to go for some easy buzz and stuff, and that rubs some people the wrong way. There are definitely purists out there that want, if you're not running, Tails Linux, then don't even talk to me. And it's like, well, my mom's not know how to install and run Tails Linux, let alone, be comfortable using it. And security keys. I was so glad when they finally started doing a lot of that stuff on your smartphone instead of having to carry around a physical key. Because even I, who understand the value and the security of having to have a physical security key as my 2-factor was just a pain in the butt.
I love my security key.
I won't do it. And I know that a lot of other people won't do it either. And I know some people like you.
I love mine. But I also if you leave your laptop in a safe but are still paranoid, you can just take your key with you. So it's a lot easier than carrying a laptop with you.
Yeah, you're right. But so yeah, it does come down to there's another slider, there's another axis, another dimension to consider on all these recommendations is how difficult is it for the regular person to do? Because if it's too difficult, let's face it, they're just not going to do it. The best security measures are the one you're actually going to do.
Yeah, but there's also times when, like, I feel like a lot of people have been reaching out to me lately being like, I care about security now because I'm worried about X, Y, and Z. Like, what should I be doing? And sometimes it is the security. It depends on the situation. But we don't recommend, like, we do try to get people off of SMS, not just because it's less secure, but because how many times have somebody lost a phone, or they lost a job and lost access to their phone, or they had a breakup and suddenly were cut off from a family plan for a phone and now they don't have any of their MFA keys. Like, so definitely at least switch from SMS to like an app or a security key if you want phishing resistant.
If you can handle it. Yeah. It is more secure, but yeah.
I love my security key. I mean, I just keep mine I keep one on a keychain and I keep one plugged into my laptop and then I have a backup. But yeah.
So you got one of those little low profile YubiKeys or whatever that's just super snug to the USB port?
I have one of those, yeah. And then I have another one on my keychain and it's cool because it has USB. It has like two different. It's one of those old camera ones.
It's A on one side and C on the other?
Yeah, I love it. And then I have a backup. But yeah, you're right. Not everybody will use them.
And you just said it. You got to have backups. If you've used keys, you got to have two of them. And they have limited space. I don't know about you, but I got a lot of accounts. How many keys do you have?
Well, I have my two keys and then I have a backup. But there are times when, say I don't have my keychain on me and I'm trying, there's like some Google thing that's very annoying where I can't get on my phone because I don't have my key. And there's like a backup mechanism, but it doesn't work because that one also wants a key. And it's my own fault because I set up Google Advanced Protection Program, but it's annoying. Like, yeah, it's my fault for not carrying it around constantly, but there's times when I forget. So yeah.
Well, and not to beat this dead horse, but one of the other things that changes too is a company gets bought out by somebody who's not as trustworthy as the original owner. Maybe it's a small company that sells out to a big company. They get swallowed and the big company wants to monetize something that the small company didn't. There's a lot of reasons why specific recommendations can go stale or...
I think we were talking about that recently with a certain company who I won't name that people don't trust anymore. And I'm like, none of the issues that you're mentioning have changed since when you did trust them. So it's better to not have to trust the company like Signal. Like everything's end-to-end encrypted. Somebody I don't like could become the CEO of Signal, at least theoretically, and it won't change how I feel about using Signal unless they make like major technical changes, which is not true about other providers where it's like they have access to your information and you don't care as long as you trust them, but then somebody says or does something that makes you distrust them. Your threat model hasn't really changed. Your perception of it has changed. So,
Yep. All right. So in another report that you were a part of, you decry the paywalling of key security features. And some of this, maybe it's more common in enterprise software. We've certainly seen this with Microsoft where if you want the logs for what's going on, you got to pay extra, which really bit them in the butt I think it was last year. And they've now since, I think, made that available to everybody. But for consumers, it happens too. Like this drives me nuts. BitLocker, for whatever stupid reason, full disk encryption, which is standard on every Mac with File Vault, you don't get on Windows Home, which is what almost everybody who gets a Windows computer has, because that's what comes with it when you get it off the Best Buy shelf, right? Or order it from Amazon or whatever. You have to get Pro or higher currently for that. So is it ever okay to require someone to pay extra for security and privacy features?
That is a good question. So actually, this is an example of when I was kind of amplifying something I heard about in the hacker community, because I was at a conference called LabsCon, and Kimberly Price from Zadig Security gave a talk about a baseline security features that she thought should be available to everybody, just the way that like backup cameras and seatbelts in cars are available to everybody.
Right.
And I don't know if I can speak to all security and privacy features, but I agree with their assessment on the ones mentioned in what they call the SaaS safety bar. I don't know if it makes sense for all security tools to be free. Like we talked about security keys. Like I pay for my security key. You can't make all hardware free for everybody. Though there are companies that will give out free copies to people who are most impacted, like people in vulnerable communities or like.
That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't expect free YubiKeys for the world. You know? But I don't know. I think that there are like baseline security features that should be available to everybody. And we actually mentioned this, the Zadig SaaS safety bar, in comments to CISA's security bad practices guidance. And they incorporated some of our suggestions in their updated guidance, which was really, really cool to see.
So what are some of those features? What were some of the baseline features that you think there should be? What did you discover that should be on that list?
Okay, so one of them was support for MFA.
Yeah.
Allowing an administrator to require the use of MFA, so they could tell everybody who has access to their data, they have to have MFA enabled.
Oh, okay.
SSO integration.
Single sign-on. Okay.
Yeah, single sign-on. And then basic role-based access controls for admin features.
Okay, so this sounds like it's more enterprise level stuff.
Yeah. This is an enterprise level, but the argument that we made is that this applies to individual consumers for a couple of reasons. One, because like things that you think are enterprise, you're probably using or impacted by, like Spotify. Like I can't get MFA on my Spotify account. It's just not available, which I think is a problem. But like I don't use Spotify as a small business. I use it as an individual. And then also like my, local water company might be a small business. There might be a rural hospital that's a small to medium sized business. And so, yeah, the argument we made is that this absolutely does impact individuals. But like Kimberly went even further in her talk and said that she thought it was a national security threat. And I don't think that's wrong.
Yeah, well, I certainly think full disk encryption should be part of that list. Everyone should have access to that for free. It should be built in.
Yeah, and there was other things too, like encryption in transit, being able to delete data. Like if somebody posts data, so this is another thing that would affect an individual. What if I accidentally post private data and I'm unable to delete it in an app? Like, is there a way to request data destruction? What if my account is compromised? Is there a way that, they can keep my account, but that information gets deleted? And like audit trails, those impact everybody if something bad happens and they can't track who did it or how it happened or prevent it in the future. Force logout. Yeah, so a lot of some of it is very specific to enterprise, but a lot of it affects everybody.
Well, and look at things like Let's Encrypt. I mean, that was such a democratizing effect on the internet for security. I mean, it used to be that, I don't know what the numbers were, but it was maybe 10% or 15% of websites used HTTPS because it costs money. It used to cost a lot, in some cases, a lot of money to get those certificates. And then Google and some other folks came along and said, why don't we just make it free? And all of a sudden, everything was encrypted. I mean, that is another reason, I think, for making sure that access to this stuff is easy and free whenever possible.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Let's Encrypt is awesome.
And then for privacy, this is true of privacy as well. And I think this is something we forget about is like Facebook in Europe, it was basically trying to say, okay, sure, we won't track you for ads, but if you do, it's going to cost you to use Facebook, And so now we have this two-tiered system where if you want privacy, you have to have money to do it. And a lot of people don't have the money to do that or can't afford the extra money to have privacy, so they sell out. Or, well, that's a wrong way to put it, but they have to give up their privacy in order to have these free services because they don't really have a choice.
Yeah,
so,
I hate that. Yeah. I hate it here.
Yeah. Okay. So there are rarely financial consequences for companies today with regard to security and privacy failures. Why? I don't know. It's like one of the only industries in the planet that we're such a litigious country here in the U.S. where we sue everybody if they screw something up, if we think it's a class action lawsuit. But for whatever reason, software has, and IoT kind of products they have these terms of service that just say use as is, the fault's yours. If anything goes wrong, don't come to us. And you sign it just by opening the seal on the box, you agree to this, right? For some reason. And then when something bad happens, they blame the victims. Oh, you didn't take advantage of all the security features we had. You used them wrong. So this is a deep question. I get that, but like, where does responsibility for security and privacy lie today? And then where really should it lie? Yeah,
no, I really try to steer away from blaming the victims, even though there are things people can sometimes do to improve their security posture. But what would be even better is if they didn't have to do all that work. Like,
right.
Which is why I think like some of CISA's work promoting secure by design and secure by default software is so important.
Yes, absolutely. And it's secure by design, private by design is another one. We have to design these things to begin with. Because so many of these, email was never designed for security. Trying to bolt on PGP and things like that after the fact was difficult and still problematic. It's so much easier and so much more robust if you do it from the get-go. And we're still not there yet. There's still just a lot of companies who are not doing that. And from a liability standpoint, a lot of companies it's too expensive to put the security in. But how expensive was it to deal with the fallout and reputation and other things when the bad things inevitably happen because you didn't protect your stuff?
Right. Yeah. No, and I feel like sometimes people will say, "Oh, I have so many things I need to do to secure my devices," and it's a problem. But I don't want to not tell them how to secure their devices. But I think this is like a societal problem that you have to do so many things. This isn't just baked in. Like it's not just set up by default. So yeah, I see that as a like my ideal would be that we wouldn't need Security Planner because everything would be secure by default in design. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd love to be put out of business. Right? I don't want that kind of job security if that's what it takes.
Right. Or at least if it was easier, I could be like, "Oh, just do these 3 things and you're good. You don't have to spend a week or an hour or whatever."
So what role should government be playing in all of this? Some people believe that the free market is just broken. Like there's the incentives, the financial incentives are just all wrong for companies to do security and certainly privacy. And so therefore they think, well, the only thing that's going to make this happen is regulations from the government. And then other people think, oh, government, I mean, they're too slow, they're too ineffective, or they're even just too corrupt. And therefore we can't rely on them either. So I know a lot of people in the security community say you can't trust any of that stuff. You've got to make it work for yourself. So you've got to understand these things and implement them yourselves. Where do you come down on all that?
Well, one of the things that's really cool for me about working at Consumer Reports is I get to work with Justin Brookman, who's a policy whiz, and he's the one who has told me, like, I learned a lot about how the FTC has interpreted Section 5 of the FTC Act, which is basically mandating that companies use reasonable safeguards to protect services from external attacks that could access personal information. So I agree with that. I think that businesses should be required legally to not offer products that don't meet reasonable security mandates. But as far as like strategy, I think one of the things we do at Consumer Reports and that I do individually is like taking a multi-tier approach. So that's advocating for policy change, putting pressure on companies to be more consumer friendly, but also educating people about what products meet privacy and cybersecurity standards, but also what settings they need to change or what they need to do to improve their security posture. So I don't know that you necessarily have to choose between the approaches. I think what ultimately creates change is a combination of tactics, or maybe you don't know exactly which one's going to work, so you're just going to try all of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And all the above is an answer to some of these questions. And so I've always said that if we can't get mandated regulations for security, if we can at least get some mandated transparency. And that's kind of like the nutrition label approach. Like, if in the U.S. cyber trust mark, which is something that is just now kind of coming online, where they're going to find some independent third parties. I think I actually picked UL Labs, the people that, whenever you buy an extension cord, there's a little tag that says UL listed or whatever on it, right? There are independent bodies outside of Consumer Reports that do these sorts of things, and they have contracted them to say, this meets or does not meet these basic security standards. I think that is a way that we can approach this without necessarily forcing them to do it. But if we can at least force them to report where they are, at least now consumers, the market might be able to function.
Yeah. And actually CR has helped a lot with it. That's something that Stacey's worked on with the cyber trust mark. But yeah, yes and no. I feel like it's good to be able to make those informed decisions, but also at the same time to realize that sometimes it's like cookies on websites. Sometimes people just click through, because it's so overwhelming.
Fatigue. Oh, yeah, it's a thing. Pop-up fatigue is a thing.
And then I still think, like we talked about earlier, that there should be, a baseline of security features. Like it's not enough to tell people, oh, by the way, this isn't actually a secure product. Like it should be secure.
Right, especially if they're not, all of them are not secure. Like cars are horrible for privacy. You can't, even if there was a label on the cars, they'd all say they're bad.
Right. Yeah. I hate that. That's one of the things I hate. That's when I feel like you really need to push the industry to make those changes, which I know we're going to talk about memory safety a little bit later, but that's one of the things that when I started worrying about memory safety at the time, I'm like, there's nothing we can recommend for people to do. There's no setting they can switch. There's no device we can recommend. Like we need to start pushing companies and government because there's nothing you can do, which is a horrible, helpless feeling.
Well, and I like to say that regulation is the mother of invention because, whenever you put constraints on somebody, it forces them to innovate. And look I always look at cars. The car industry bitched and moaned for years about we can't afford to put seatbelts in all the cars, or we can't afford to put airbags in all the cars, and yet they're there, and people are safer because of that. Mm-hmm. And it's a level playing field because they're all required to doing it. Right.
Yeah, which is great.
CR does many other things. One of the things you guys also do that you are also a part of is an annual cyber readiness report. And kind of does a big survey of people and kind of see where the zeitgeist is at. And I know you were part of the 2024 one, and there were some very interesting statistics in there. But I'm curious from your point of view, what were some of the most interesting takeaways from that report? And one of the things that struck me was we always talk about the low hanging fruit, the simple things you can do that everyone should be doing, and a lot of people just still are not doing them. So, why do you think that is?
Yeah. Let me break that down into two questions.
Yes,
so the first,
it is two questions, fairly. Okay. So go ahead.
So the most important takeaway I thought was just the sheer amount of people that were being scammed. Like I thought that was really interesting, and also how it disproportionately impacted Black and Hispanic consumers for a bunch of reasons that actually Scott Meddens wrote an article about. It was like they were twice as likely, Black and Hispanic Americans were twice as likely to have lost money to a digital attack or scam as white Americans. And the other thing I thought was interesting, because I get a lot of people, every week somebody will be very concerned about deepfakes or AI scams, but what we saw was that the scams that people were falling for was due to phishing and impersonation. But just the amount of people who had account takeovers, I also thought was really surprising. It was like 22% of people we surveyed had social media accounts taken over. 11% had email accounts taken over, which I think is really high.
Amazing. Yeah, that is 1 in 10, 1 in 5. That is crazy.
Yeah. And so I thought that was surprising. I'm excited to kind of keep tracking it. Hopefully it'll improve. But I don't know. As far as adoption, there are some things that people were doing or said they were doing, like strong passwords, MFA, unique passwords, changing default passwords. Like, of course, I want to see those at 100%, but we did have a pretty high percentage. But yeah, I'm always sad that people don't use password managers. Because I think password managers are amazing, but like I guess they're just not as usable for other people as I think they are.
I think they're easier than regular passwords. You don't have to type anything. Exactly. You don't have to remember anything. I keep trying to, people tip my class, I try to make it, it's actually easier. Like once you're set up, it's actually easier. You don't have to think of a new password. Like I tell them, I don't know any of my passwords, like any of them. Because they're all crazy, stupid, random 20-character gibberish. I only know one password, and that's the master password. And you could do that too.
Well, I know I have a password to open my laptop and then my password manager password.
Okay, sure. All right. Yeah. I do have a local password for, yes, that's
And
true.
then I have a work laptop password. So I have to memorize 3 passwords. But yes. Though you can always put some of those in your password manager. But I don't know. I tricked somebody into using a password manager once by sending them.
Oh, do tell. How'd you do that?
I created a shared vault. And they asked me for a password to something, and I told them it was in the password manager. But they still didn't use it on their phone. Like, I think, computer literacy is a lot lower than we think it is. Because I always think, I'm not really great at tech. Like, I only know a little bit of Python, a little bit of Rust, or not Rust, sorry. I don't know any Rust. I know a little bit of Python. I know a little bit of Go. And, I'm always I'm not really a technologist. I don't do this for a living. Oh, I know a little bit of HTML. I know enough to be dangerous. But, a lot of people off the street, they barely know how to use, it is not easy for them to download an app on their laptop and their phone. It's not easy for them to set things up, even though, maybe we think it's easy, either because we've done it a lot or because we're not afraid to kind of break it or, mess around with it until it starts working. But yeah, I don't know. But I was sad about that. I also want to see greater adoption of MFA apps and security keys. But yeah, I don't know. I think I read an article once about computer literacy and I'm okay, I'm surprised at how few people have, basic computer skills, but I'm also not surprised because I know, how many people do you know that have their password is password or password 013 or something so that's kind of bearing out in adoption of these tools.
One of the most interesting articles I read recently was about choosing PIN codes. And kind of like have been phoned, somebody took a bunch of PIN codes that had been hacked. So these are the worst of the worst. These are the ones that were guessable, but are the ones that they were found in attacks or whatever. But they mapped out a heat map of PIN code choices. And so it was most PIN codes are 4 digits. So they took the first 2 digits and the last 2 digits. The first 2 digits were the column and the last 2 digits were the row. And did a heat map, and it was really interesting to see. There's the diagonal line up the middle, because those are all the repeating ones. 1111, 2222, or also 1212 or 5353. It's people like repeating numbers. So there's a line up the middle of those. 1 2 3 4 is the hottest spot on the map. It was 10% of all of them. Was 1 2 3 4.
Yeah.
4 3 2 1, which is obviously much better, was also really high, right? It's just the reverse. And then there was this grouping toward the bottom left. in the 19 to 20 range, and those were years or month and day. And so it's just really, it's interesting to see how that mapped up and how people think and how they choose their pins when they have to do something to remember.
I used to do an article every year that was like the 10 worst passwords of the year, and like probably about 7 of them were the same every year. And then you could kind of tell things about the zeitgeist, because it would be like, oh, this is a baseball password this year, or a Star Wars, whatever. Like people cared about that year. But yeah, I think I was writing it for Motherboard. I think they got tired of it.
Because it was the same every year.
Yeah, it's like, cool, we know that people have bad passwords, and like shaming people doesn't really help. Actually, that's kind of the annoying thing about password managers, is that this is kind of older research, but I remember reading a research paper that said telling people the benefits of password managers doesn't increase adoption, and neither do scare tactics. So it's like basically nobody wants to use it no matter what. There's no tactic, or I don't know if that's, I'd have to go back and reread the report to make sure I'm not misstating it, but I remember feeling really kind of hopeless after reading it. Like there's nothing you can do to get somebody to use a password manager.
Well, the password obviously is a big one that always makes the list. 1, 2, 3, 4 in any version with numbers always makes the top 10. But then like monkey 1, 2, 3, I don't. That was always in the top 20. I'm like, where? Okay, I don't know who thought that was a good password, but somebody really latched onto that one.
It must be all those typing monkey memes.
No, I'm sure the people looking for Shakespeare from the probabilistic monkeys. Okay. Yes. One of the other things that was called out in the report is, I think it was in the report, or maybe it was related to that, is it's very difficult to regain control of these accounts. You're talking about hacked accounts, email accounts, social media accounts, cellular accounts too is another thing that happens. A lot of people don't know that you could put a pin on your cellular account to help kind of prevent takeovers. But it's really, once that happens, like recovering from that is really difficult. Why is it so hard to regain access to some of these hacked accounts today?
Ugh, I hate this. I hate this because I have seen people get help if they know someone who works at a company. And I'm like, cool, it's nice that you want to help your friend, but you shouldn't have to know somebody at a company to get control of your account again. And I think it's a really good question. I don't know if I have a great answer. There was actually a letter written to Meta by a coalition of attorneys general asking for a data security review, because there's been so many scammers taking over not just Facebook, but also Instagram accounts. And there's a help center, but it's not very helpful. So yeah, I think companies need to take more substantial action to protect people from not only to help them regain control of their accounts, but also to prevent it. And it's not just Meta. You mentioned, it's also email accounts. They should have like dedicated staff to help people, and it should be easy to access them by the public, and they should promote their existence. But yeah, I think I got some weird thing saying I was locked out of an account once, and I was panicking, but it was just a bug that got fixed 10 seconds later. And I'm like, man, if this happened, I'm like, how could this have happened? I have like, I use the security key. I have blah, 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 blah. I've done all the right things. There's always like workarounds. It's just like, how badly is somebody, like how much is somebody trying to target you, and like what are their resources? But I'm like, oh, this is going to be so hard to deal with, So
well, and Stacy, one of the things when I talked to Stacy, she was talking about, escrowing not the source code for companies in case they go under, but escrowing enough money to continue to support something if necessary. I think that kind of regulation that was interesting, and maybe we should. One of the things we could be requiring is that they have enough staff to handle account takeover security issues, because that is something you need usually immediate help with, and you can't, of course they'll try to do it with some like AI agent or something, but you really need a human to help you through something like that. And there should be people on staff. I absolutely agree. Trying to find a human at these places is not impossible. The other thing I've heard people do is go to social media and call them out there, and sometimes they get contacted.
But like, what better incentive is there for them to prevent it if they had to pay, like they actually have skin in the game? Because they actually have to help people whose accounts are taken over. But yeah, no, I hate the AI. I got in an AI war with an Uber Eats AI, because they sent me food that wasn't delivered, and I wanted a refund. I'm one of those annoying people that will keep trying to get a refund. like I don't just give up, and then I think their AI told me that they could not deliver a refund. They couldn't give me a refund. It was just like cut and paste over and over and over again. And I'm like, I'm going to contest the credit card charge. But then people told me like they might cut off your entire account. And I'm like, oh my God, like I can't use Uber anymore because I didn't want to pay for food I didn't get. But I think what the issue was is that they require a photograph, but I didn't provide a photograph because I couldn't photograph
of what?
like the missing items, I guess.
How do you photograph something you don't have?
Maybe you just photograph everything else to show
my
that it's
empty
missing.
porch.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think I just skipped the image, and so I think it flagged it as not being a real report because I didn't provide an image of an empty box or space or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I don't think that, I'm not saying that there should never be AI used in these, but there should be like a manual review by a human, not just an AI pretending to be a human. So yeah, it's bad. Everything is bad. And I think that's been the problem with some of these account takeovers too, is that you fill out a form and get like a rote response, or like it's like you're just, banging your head against the wall. At least if it's a human that doesn't care, you like, no.
It's kind of like the old phone, now old phone props where, it's asking you to, is this your problem or is this your problem? And you just say representative over and over again until finally, we'll get you a representative. It's the same thing with support tickets. The first one you get is always automated. Like there's some keyword search they do through your ticket text, your submission. And like, he mentioned password and he mentioned this, and that not a human doing this. Some automated thing said, send them this stock reply. And it says, if you still have questions, reply. And then,
I dealt with this with the healthcare thing where they were trying to make me pay for something that was supposed to be covered. And I'm like, oh my God, I filed like 4 complaints. Like I got review on all of them and they just will automatically, but I'm that annoying person that'll be like, well, this was probably coded wrong and I'm going to call these 4 people. Like I probably do it too much. Like, I don't know if it's like a healthy way to live.
Yeah, right.
But you shouldn't have to like, be relentlessly annoying to get a refund. And it's, but I'm like, how much money do they make because people give up? Which I don't think that giving up is, like, probably I should give up more because I'm spending more time and energy on it than the refund is worth.
Yeah.
But like,
you're holding their feet to the fire,
Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, how much are they saving because people just give up, especially for healthcare because you're sick and dealing with the actual illness or condition that you have. So
again, back to the fatigue thing. I think at some point that's factored in. Like they're trying for that. That's not a bug; it's a feature to some of these systems. All right, so this has been fantastic. But wrapping up, what's next for you? Is there anything big in the works at Consumer Reports in the area of security and privacy? What's coming up?
We are working on a report with PEN America, which is a nonprofit organization that does a lot of work on free expression, but also online harassment. That's been in the works for a while, so keep an eye out for that. And then on the security planner front, we're working on transitioning to a dynamic environment to make everything run faster. And we're going to be adding a few new pages. There's one on sharing videos and photos privately. There's one on reducing the risks of online dating and one on browsing more privately on shared devices, which Jeff Landale helped spearhead. So that's really cool. And then I have to give a shout out to Stacy, because another thing that Consumer Reports is working on, I know you've interviewed her, she's great, is to make sure IoT devices are supported for the life of the product.
Yes.
Yeah, because we think there's like a moral and ethical obligation for companies to support them for a reasonable lifespan and to let people know in advance, like, how long are they supported? So you don't find yourself with a vulnerable product months later with no way to patch it. So there should be better norms around that. So we have a new CEO named Phil Radford, which is super exciting because he's done some really amazing work for the Sierra Club and Greenpeace. And
how long was the previous CEO there for?
So Marta Tolado was at Consumer Reports for just over a decade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was great too.
Well, you guys do fantastic work and you keep doing better stuff. So thank you so much for doing everything you do. And I can't believe all the things you've got your hands in. So keep doing all that stuff. That's fantastic. So how do people follow you? If somebody wants to see what you're up to, how do they follow you?
I'm on Blue Sky at Yael Writes, and my personal website is yaelwrites.com. And if they want to follow Consumer Reports Security Planner, it's securityplanner.org.
Fantastic. I will put all that in the show notes. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. This was really, really fun.
I'm so glad we got that together, and I'm really personally glad that I had a chance to meet Yael in person because she was so fun to talk to. And I absolutely hope we can get her back on the show again in the future because Lord knows she's involved in lots of things, lots of great projects, and I'm sure that there will be many more to come. So definitely check out Security Planner. There's a link in the show notes, but it's securityplanner.consumerreports.org. We also mentioned the digital standard. That was something I actually did an interview on about, I think it's been like 5 years ago now. I talked with Ben Moskowitz from Consumer Reports about that. and it's still going. It's a really cool project. Consumer Reports does so much more than what we normally think about them doing. So I'm really glad to have a chance to highlight some of that here. So plenty of stuff in the show notes. Check out the links there. Yael did talk about hardware keys quite a bit, and we didn't really stop to explain those. If you're not familiar with them, you can look up something called a YubiKey, YUBIKEY. That's one of the more popular ones in this space, but there definitely are others. And it's sort of like passkeys before passkeys were done on your phone. It's a two-factor authentication mechanism that's very secure because you actually have to have the physical device to do it, but it's also inconvenient for the user because you have to have this little physical device whenever you want to, do the two-factor authentication with your account, which personally drives me crazy. But for people for which security is a really big deal, that is probably the more secure way to go. I probably need to do a tip of the week about this at some point, just to explain them more and kind of put it out there in case it's something you might be interested in doing. I also put a link in the show notes to an article that I wrote about choosing a PIN code, which references the article I was talking about with the heat map, and I actually stole the heat map picture for my article, so you can see it there. And I linked to the original article if you want to read that too. It's really very interesting, and I think as a good kind of a simplistic way to look at bigger issues like how to choose a good password, and maybe from the flip side, how the attackers, understanding human nature, are able to guess our passwords when we don't use something like a password manager to choose something random. When we pick something that we can remember, then it usually has some sort of meaning, and that significantly reduces the number of possible passwords. And the bad guys are really good at picking them. And by picking them, I mean using automated computer software that can test a lot of very common passwords in the blink of an eye. So anyway, it's a very interesting article with interesting implications. It's well worth a read. So patrons on Thursday will get bonus content as usual. Gosh, we ended up talking for like another half hour, I think. and I cut out a lot of that. I asked her what her origin story was and how she got into InfoSec and privacy. And it had a twist. They always do. Something I did not see coming relating to her reporting on MMA. Yeah, mixed martial arts. So there's that. We talked about DEF CON and hacker culture. We got into some more technical topics like memory-safe software languages. I asked her about some of the reviews she did on VPNs and whether that ruffled any feathers, and passkeys and a few other things. So anyway, patrons will have that bonus content to look forward to on Thursday as usual. Guys, I have so many interviews in the pipeline. It is just crazy. I've never tracked this many interviews and potential interviews on my spreadsheet. I don't think ever. I have like 6 interviews scheduled just in the next few weeks to record, and then another half dozen or so like waiting in the wings. So lots of content coming up. We'll do a new show, of course, next week as usual, and I will try to address some of the technical and security and privacy aspects of all the craziness going on right now in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Regardless of your political persuasion, there are significant things going on that I think we need to talk about, so I'm sure I will have a story or two about that next week. And then the next interview up on the docket is going to be with Weld Pond, a.k.a. Chris Wysopal. He was one of the original Loft hackers and also co-founder of Veracode. I just recorded that interview, and it was really interesting. So that will be coming up soon. And then just a whole bunch after that. So seriously, now would be a great time to subscribe, and then you won't miss any of that. All right, that's enough for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.